All right, well, today we're going to look at a woman who could be considered a queen of courage. Her story is written in a book that bears her name, it's Esther. So as you turn to the book of Esther, I want to give you a little background on the book. Nearly 500 years before Christ, and about 50 years after Ezra had led the Jews back to Jerusalem from their captivity in Babylon. Remember, they're in captivity because of their sin and their unrepentant heart. Many of the Jewish people now still live in the land of the Persians, under the reign of a king named Xerxes. Now, Xerxes is a pagan who was known to be a cruel man, an unpredictable man, driven by his sensual desires. We're first introduced to him at the first part of Esther, where he has staged this grand festival to exhibit his power and wealth and his kingdom, and it lasts for 6 months. And at the end of that festival, he has another 7-day festival. You could call it the after party, filled with a lot of food and drinking. Obviously, too much drinking, because on the 7th day of the feast, King becomes quite drunk, and in his drunkenness, he decides that he wants his beautiful queen, Queen Vashti, to come and parade herself before the guest. Obviously, she's offended by the request, and she refuses. Her refusal made him furious, and he takes the crown from her. She is no longer queen. After some time has passed, he's now going to find a replacement for Vashti. And his council advised him to hold a beauty contest, find among the women the most beautiful women of the land, and make her the new queen. And that's how Esther becomes the queen of Persia. Shortly thereafter, we're introduced to the villain of the story. He's an ambitious, arrogant noble by the name, a man by the name of Haman. Haman was a favorite of the king, and he apparently had done something good that allowed him a place of position and a place of honor. Because the king passed a decree that commanded all of his officials, they must bow down to Haman whenever he passed by. But there was one man in the city who wasn't going to bow down to him. Esther's uncle Mordecai. Mordecai was a righteous man, and he wasn't going to bow his knee to anyone except for God. So Esther 3, verse 5 says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down and pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people was, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So this is Haman's plan. This is his scheme to destroy, to annihilate all of the Jews. And he goes before the king, and as he goes before the king, he says, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the people in all the province of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all the other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this business. Now, because the king trusted Haman's judgment, the king makes this decree that all of the Jews be annihilated. So with all of that in mind, we come to our story today in Esther chapter 4. Now, let me try to summarize a little bit of it for you. Mordecai finds out about this decree, and he's heartbroken. He puts on sackcloth and ash. It's a symbol of mourning, and he goes outside the palace, and he begins to wail loudly. And Esther finds out.
Esther sends somebody to ask what's wrong. And he sends a message back along with the decree that all of the people are gone, all of the Jews is going to be destroyed. And he tells her, you need to go before the king. You need to defend us. But she's terrified. You can't go before the king. If anybody goes before the king without him summoning them, that's certain death. So she sends that reply back to Mordecai. And then we read in Esther 4, starting with verse 12, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise of the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. So gather all of the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, and night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it be against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. During the height of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln found refuge in a midweek meeting of a Presbyterian church there in Washington, D.C. He would go with an aide, and he would sit there quietly with a stovepipe hat in his lap. He would listen intently as the preacher would preach from the scriptures, and then lead the congregation in worship. The war was tearing the nation apart. It was tearing at his soul as well. He had just lost his own son. Now Lincoln was grieving and needed some solace and some substance for his soul. So the preacher finished his message and the people began to leave. The president stood up quietly, straightened out his coat, put on his hat, and his aide stopped him and asked, "What did you think of the sermon, Mr. President?" Lincoln answered, "I thought the sermon was carefully thought through. It's eloquently delivered." And the aide said, "So you thought it was a great sermon?" And Lincoln replied, "No, I thought it failed. He didn't ask us to do something great. The preacher hadn't asked the congregation to do something great. He hadn't challenged the people or the President of the United States to do more with their life." And that disturbed him, because Lincoln saw his nation in turmoil and saw himself struggling with deep pain and loss in his life. I think he understood one central truth of the Bible, and that's this. When life gets difficult, and the world is filled with struggles and hardship and pain, that's when God calls upon his people to do something. I mean, it's a repeated theme throughout the scriptures that when God comes in contact with somebody, they're moved to do something. Sometimes they're moved to do something that's great. Noah built an ark. Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt. Joshua took down Jericho, or David took down a giant. Other times, when people come into contact with God, they do little things that has a major difference because of God's power. Remember, there was a little boy who brought his lunch to Jesus, and as a result, Jesus fed over 5,000 men. Then there was a woman who met Jesus at the well and then went back to the village and told them who she had met, and the whole community comes out to see him, and their lives was changed. Again and again throughout scriptures, we see people rise up and do great things or small things, and all of them make a difference. Because God made a difference in their lives. So when the occasion arises and we don't do something, something's wrong. So back to our story. Mordecai, he is frantic. He obeyed God. He refused to bow down and worship to another man. He has done what is right. And his obedience has brought about the threat of annihilation for his people. They will soon be destroyed, and it's his fault. So he tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth, throws ash on his head, makes his way to the walls of the palace where he cries out. Because he's not allowed in the palace because he's in sackcloth. Now, Esther hasn't heard about the edict yet. And she has no idea the danger that's in store for her people. But there's no ignoring that loud cry from her uncle outside of her home. So she sends one of her attendants to find out what's wrong. Mordecai sends that attendant back with the news that Haman's plan, along with a copy of the edict. Mordecai is very clear on what he wants, because he expects Esther to do something about this impending danger. He expects her to go and to talk to the king, because he realizes that she's the only one who can do anything about the problem. But Esther doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to get involved. So she explains this is not a good time to approach the king, and in fact, it's never a good time to approach the king. He's a dangerous man. And she might be putting her own life in danger. So the question is, why doesn't Esther want to intercede for her people? Why doesn't she want to approach the king? What emotion is behind that refusal? She's afraid. One of the major reasons why you and I don't do something, why we do not do what God wants us to do, it's because we're afraid. Fear comes in all different shapes and sizes. There's a psychologist at Yale that once compiled a list of people's most common fears. It's a fear of failure, fear of commitment, fear of trusting others, fear of thinking or speaking in public, fear of being alone. You could go on and on with this list. Fear is a very real emotion in the life of people. It controls us. It limits us. It enslaves us. And God doesn't want that for our life. He doesn't want fear to rule our life. So throughout scriptures, he says, fear not. You know, someone had noted that this was a command that showed up quite a few times in scripture. So they wanted to see how many times the do not fear, fear not, or words like that appeared in the Bible. And what they found was kind of surprising, because it shows up 365 times, one for each day. So that command could be in there that many times because God doesn't want a single day of our lives to be dominated by the fear. So how can I overcome it? Well, you can overcome fear the same way Esther overcame her fear. Now, granted, she needed a preacher like Mordecai to point it out to her, but you got me. I'm a preacher. I'll point it out to you. And the first way to overcoming is this. One of the things you'll find, all of these rhymes, so I had a little fun this week. If it is to be, it may very well be up to thee. The first lie of fear is the lie that if you just ignore the problem, it will go away. It won't matter if I do something or someone else does something or not. All I have to do is just sit back. Somebody else will take care of it. It's a lie. If God brings a problem to your attention, he probably wants you to do something about it. That's what Mordecai is trying to tell his niece when he says, who knows? Who knows but that you have come to this royal position for such a time as this. He's telling Esther, it's come to your attention. You have the tools to deal with this problem. Now get busy. do something. Now, if you notice, Mordecai followed his own advice because he was afraid too, but he overcame his fear by doing what he could do to help the problem. He doesn't have an ear with the king, so he can't go to the king, but he knows someone that does. He knows the queen, and so he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth. He begins to weep at her wall loud enough. He may not be able to get the king's attention, but he intends to get hers. Mordecai overcomes his fear by doing what he could. And it is what he's telling Esther to do as well. So the key is to realize that we have to depend on him. And secondly, to overcome, we have to, if you don't go, trouble will grow. If you see a problem and you could have done something about it, but you didn't, the problem won't go away. It might be fixed for a little time, but it's not going to go away. And that's what Mordecai is telling Esther. He's saying, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this point, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. Now, if God believes something is important enough to bring it to your attention, and you don't do something about it, my thought is he's not going to be very happy. You don't really want God unhappy with you. Isaiah puts it this way. Isaiah 8 says, do not fear. Fear what they fear, or do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. And that's pretty much what Mordecai is telling Esther. Don't make God mad. You won't like it when he's mad. Oddly enough, it's fear of God that helps us deal with all of the other fears in our life. That's why Psalm says, the angel of the Lord encampeth around those who feared him, and he delivered them. The fear of the Lord, your saints, for those who fear lack nothing. Now, that kind of seems counterintuitive. How could adding one more fear to my life really help me to control the other fears that I already have? God's recipe for conquering our fears is to realize he is the only one we need to fear. If we fear him, if we place his desires above ours, he has the power and the desire to protect us from anything that we may fear. The last key to overcoming fear is to really obey. Sometimes you need to fast and pray. When you're faced with a problem, you're not sure how to handle it, you need to kick into your spiritual high gear. Sometimes it means getting serious about your prayer life. You can't get more serious about your prayer life than fasting. Esther faced a problem. She didn't know how to handle the problem. So she decided to take prayer seriously. And that's when she tells Mordecai, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 nights or day. I and my maidservants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Here's what she's saying. She's saying, I do fear the king of Persia, but I fear the God of Israel more. And so I will obey God. But first, I'm going to get spiritually prepared for this challenge that I'm about to face. Now, I'm not going to tell you the rest of this story, Maybe a homework assignment for you, read the rest of Esther. But I will tell you this, Esther wins. Haman loses big time. But realize Esther only won because she overcame her fear. And she overcame her fear by realizing it was up to her to deal with the problem. If she shrinks away from her duty, the problem won't go away. And that in order to meet the challenges, she had to be serious about prayer. So she overcame because she made a choice. And her choice was between fearing God more or fearing the unknown. She chose fearing God. And God gave her the strength. A long, long time ago, in a war that took place in the Middle East, there was a spy that was captured, and he was sentenced to death by a general of the Persian army. The general was a unique man, and he had adopted a strange and unusual custom for cases like these. He permitted the condemned person to make a choice. The prisoner could either face the firing squad or pass through a black door. As the moment of the execution drew near, the general ordered the spy to be brought to him, and he says, "What shall it be? Will it be the firing squad or will it be the black door?" It's not an easy decision. The prisoner didn't make it in haste, but ultimately he chose the firing squad, preferring what he knew from that unknown horrors that might lie ahead from that mysterious black door. Not much later, gunfire filled the air. The spy lay dead on the ground. The general stared at his boots, and he turned to his aide, and he said, "You see how it is with men. They will always prefer the known way to the unknown way. It's a characteristic of people to be afraid of the undefined." Yet I gave him a choice. And the aide was curious. He asked, "What's behind the black door?" General smiled and he said, "It's freedom. And I've known only a few people brave enough to take it." The one thing that we fear the most in our life is oftentimes the unknown, the unforeseen, the uncontrolled. The fear has the ability to immobilize us and haunt our dreams. It is when we're faced with that fear that we have a choice to make. Will we trust in God and give Him our fears? For it's only in trusting in God that we find freedom. Maybe that's what you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for freedom and you don't want to be afraid anymore. If that's your decision, you can come now as we stand and sing.